So we're from a small town, surrounded by other small farming towns. Our town has maybe 7,000 people in it, while the smaller towns have around 500 to 3,000, depending on the town. My father works as a police officer in one of these smaller towns, where a large part of its jurisdiction is farmland that have one house every mile or so. Along one of these stretches of farms is a very old cemetery that won't come up on any Google searches, and the name of it has kill in it. It's kind of foreboding. This cemetery itself used to be tied to an old church which burned down before we arrived in the town. The church, before burning down, was supposedly tied to satanic rituals or something, which many believe to have led to paranormal activity there. Consequently, the graveyard is really popular for teenagers to go to at night and get drunk at, and I am guilty of this myself, although I didn't see anything while I was there. My father, being a cop, was in the neighborhood and was checking out the cemetery to see if there were any kids running around or drinking there. He pulled up to the side of the road and shined his light into the graveyard. He didn't see anything until he passed over the really old graves. He saw, as he says, a girl in a dress, standing alone. It appeared so suddenly for him that he passed his light beyond her, and by the time he refocused where his light was pointing, she was gone. He then got out of his squad car and spent a moment calling out and seeing if anyone was there. As the cemetery has a reputation for being haunted, he didn't spend too long looking and left it at that. Well, the first story is your cut-and-dry graveyard apparition. The next one takes the cake in comparison. In the town we live in, there is a relatively new store that deals in lighting fixtures and other electrical items. It's very much a home refurbishment store. Across the street from the store is an old but still in use gravel quarry. The land that both these things exist on were owned by the same man, whose name I don't know. The owner died maybe 10 years back and was very much a Scrooge. He wanted to be buried on his land, which helped him make all of his money. And so, he was buried behind the store. And this is where my father's next story happened. My father received a call from dispatch that the alarms at the store had gone off, and he went to investigate. Our town is very small, so cops don't have partners. They're on their own. He arrives at the store and, sure enough, the alarm is going off. He opens up the building, which the doors to were locked, and went inside to find that the lights upstairs in the manager's office were on. He went upstairs to see who was there and found that no one was in the room. The manager's room was fairly small, maybe measuring 20 feet by 20 feet, and only had filing cabinets, desks, and shelves in it. Nowhere someone could hide. My father looked around and, unsurprisingly, found no one on the premises. He turned off the alarm, turned off the lights, and locked the building. As he was about to radio it in, the alarm started going off again, so he unlocked the doors and ran inside. He heard footsteps this time coming from the manager's room, but all the lights were off. He turned them on and ran inside to look, but no one was in the room, and there was only one entrance to this room, and you had to go up a metal staircase to get to it. My father, again, searched the building, and finding no one, locked it up and left. A couple of hours later, he heard another radio in from dispatch saying that the alarm was going off again, but this time, another dispatch picked it up and handled it. Apparently, this isn't the first time it's happened either, and multiple officers in the area report hearing footsteps and noises from that building at night, never finding anyone inside. I cleaned and locked up churches for a few months in high school. Some of the scariest moments in my life occurred in those empty churches. On one occasion, I heard kids playing in a nursery. Only, it's after midnight on a Saturday night, and I'm unquestionably alone. On another occasion, I heard a church organ play in a 100-year-old church. Again, locking up late at night, alone, only to find out that the organ has been out of service for 25 years, and I'm not the only employee who's heard it. But the worst of all, by far, was getting chased out of an empty church by a disembodied scream. It was the only time in my life where I nearly literally pissed myself. I quit the next day. I was locking up, and this was around 1:30 at night. My girlfriend at the time was in the car and she wouldn't step foot in these churches with me, citing story 1 and 2 as reason to opt out. This church was certainly not the spookiest of my duties. It was a newer building and it wasn't really large, maybe 13 rooms and a congregation hall. It had a lobby and one big hallway that connected everything with the rooms off the sides. I checked the first 3 and they were all locked. The last door was at the end of the big hall. Mind you, it's completely dark, save for my dinky keychain light. So I get to the last door and the damn thing isn't locked. I've always been fluent in 2 languages, English and cursing. So I proceeded to dog cuss the non-present asshole who left the door unlocked. Well, I get to about my second MFing such and what, when right in my ear I hear a blaring scream. I mean, it's right in my ear and it's a lady and she's pissed. And I know there ain't shit between me and the wall but 2 feet of empty, now screaming at me, air. I shit you not, I literally jumped and spun, out in one motion. I covered the 50 yards of hallway in under 3 seconds, I'm betting. If Usain Bolt and I were racing that night, he would have looked as slow as an 80-year-old with a bad hip compared to me. And the sick thing is that, as I'm tearing ass down this hall, this thing is right on my side, screaming as loud as it started. I hit the glass doors, and my girlfriend said that all she could see was my eyes as big as fucking baseballs. I jumped in the car, slammed the gas, popped a curb, and never went back. I remember thinking at the time, thank goodness that 1, I saw nothing, because I'm sure I would have pissed myself, in front of the girlfriend even. 2, it stopped at the door, because I'm sure I and my girlfriend would have pissed ourselves if it followed me to the car. And 3, I didn't drop my keys, because there was not one fat chance in an iced hell I was going back in that place. I moved back to town a year ago, so I happen by that church every now and then. I can laugh now, but that was one of the scariest things that's ever happened to me. Recently, and by recently, I mean like 8 months ago, I had never had any experience before this. I moved to an island in the South Pacific and have gotten the hiking bug, so I try and get out to new locations as much as I possibly can, what with work eating into my precious time and all. This happened about 2 weeks ago. Since I live in the South Pacific region, it gets mighty hot, driving all but the most insane hikers indoors, unless it's at night. Of course, I'm not a masochist, so I try to do all my hiking in the early hours of the morning or in the evening when it starts getting cool. I've never been afraid of going hiking by myself. I did it when I lived in Oregon and never ran into any problems with it. But my island isn't my friendly home state. I always carry pepper spray. When I used to go hiking in Montana and Wyoming, would sometimes carry a handgun to ward off anything I couldn't take on, whether it was a bear or a person. But I had always gotten off considerably lucky. I got to the trailhead at about 6:30 in the evening. The trail was called 1,000 Steps, but in all honesty, it was mostly just a walk straight down to the cliff, and then a grueling journey back up. I didn't want to go, but my dog, Mad Moxie, needed to be walked, and I had done the hike so many times, I could probably do it in my sleep. The first thing I noticed when I pulled up was an old, rickety rusted out blue pickup truck with a big plastic tarp over the bed to keep out the rain. These are pretty common on the island, affectionately earning the name Gorm Bombs. I didn't think much of it as I hooked up Moxie and started heading down the trail, trying my best to ignore the mosquitoes that were making a meal out of my exposed neck. Heading down the trail was relatively easy. Avoiding the banana spider webs, I felt the stress of my day slowly unwind as the underbrush grew darker and night approached. I made it all the way down to the water's edge when I noticed a man standing about 100 yards away. It was dark enough now that I could only see his silhouette, so I have no idea if he was looking at me or at the water, but I chose to ignore him and instead pull Moxie's ball from my backpack and throw it for her a few times to get all her wiggles out. After some time, the man started walking over to me and stopped maybe about 10 feet away. Now, I'm not a tiny waif of a woman. I'm 23 years old and I stand at about 5'6", and this guy was just a couple of inches taller than me, but most of the locals were on the smaller side. But something about him just felt weird. "Evening," I greeted as he nodded and looked down at Moxie, who had just returned from running after a ball. I stooped down to pet her as the man kept his eyes trained on my dog. Can I help you, sir?" "Pretty dog," he responded mildly. "You alone?" "I have my dog," I said lamely, trying to sound braver than I was feeling. "I'm never alone." I tried to emphasize on the fact that I had my dog with me, but the man seemed unfazed by my statement. "Oh, well, have a good night." With that, he turned around and started walking back towards the trailhead. I watched his shadow disappear into the trees, and waited for about half an hour before I too started walking back towards the path, my mind on high alert as Moxie pulled me through the trees and up the cliffside. The crickets pierced the night as I climbed the steps, illuminated by my flashlight. My hands were full with Moxie's leash and my light, but you could bet your buns that I would have had pepper spray out if I had an extra hand. Finally, my light pierced the trees at the top and I practically booked it up the hill. When I got to the top, I nearly shat myself. The rusted blue pickup truck was sitting in the parking lot still, but their passenger side door was practically touching my car's driver's side. Inside the car, I could faintly see two men sitting in the cab, and I could feel them watching me. Slowly, I approached my car, walking as far over to the passenger side as I could, and kept Moxie with me as close as I opened the door and crawled over to the driver's side. At that moment, the door of the pickup truck flew open and my dog started going apeshit, barking at the two people who were now outside of their car and trying to break into mine. Heart in my chest, I rammed the keys into the ignition and tore out of the parking lot so quickly, I nearly took off my mirror. I called my mum as soon as I got home and she begged me to call the police. Unfortunately, police here on the island aren't as vigilant as they are on the mainland, and that area is known for car thefts, mugging and other debaucheries, as I learned from my co-workers later that week. Earlier this month, another girl actually disappeared from that area without a trace, and it makes me wonder if the men in the blue pickup truck didn't have something to do with it. If I hadn't have had Moxie with me, would I have been mugged or worse? If I've learned anything from this experience, it's that for my lady hikers, please always take pepper spray with you. Go hiking in groups and always let someone know where you're going. It might save your life someday. I did eventually call the cops about the missing female and the truck I saw, and they said that they would investigate into it. So far, I haven't heard anything, but I fear for this woman's life and realize how easily it could have been my own. Also, I realize that hiking alone, especially as a female, is a dangerous pastime. And again, I do realize how foolish and naive I was being. But I have learned and plan on never hiking alone again.